You see it all the time in movies and TV, but is it really possible to stop bullets with a sword? Well, if you're Homura from Eden Zero, then the answer is yes just about every time. In fact, Homura is kinda like those fighting game characters that just spam block and never take damage. So to figure out whether you, the viewer, could actually stop bullets like a badass samurai or Jedi Knight, we're gonna look at how Homura stops bullets, figure out the science of how she does it, and decide whether this is applicable to everyday self-defense. Obviously, before we can figure out the science behind stopping a bullet, we need to look at the science behind the actual bullet itself. For the sake of this video, we'll be looking at the 9mm bullet, one of the most common rounds of ammo used for self-defense. Now, the basic idea behind firing a bullet is pretty simple. You pull the trigger, that mechanism ignites the powder inside the bullet, and the resulting explosion launches the bullet out of the barrel and towards your target. This explosive force is why bullets are so dangerous. Because if I took a 9mm bullet and just threw it as hard as I could, the worst thing that happens is I maybe set off the gunpowder. The reason being that the amount of energy I create with my arm isn't nearly as much as the energy produced from the combustion inside of a bullet. For example, if you measure the joules generated by the average punch, joules being the unit for kinetic energy, you generally get about 100 joules. A 9mm bullet generates about 360 foot-pounds in muzzle energy, which comes out to over 488 joules. To understand that dramatic difference, we need to look at the formula for kinetic energy, namely half times mass times velocity squared. Now, if we calculate force instead of energy, it's mass times acceleration. If they sound similar, it's because they are. The basic idea is the more the object weighs and the faster it's going, the more damage it's gonna do. Since a 9mm bullet weighs next to nothing, the thing we have to think about is speed. This is especially true for Homura since her soul blade is essentially a real sword. I say this because it's very easy to mistake it for something like a lightsaber, especially if you watch the anime. The confusion really comes from how Ether in general behaves versus how Soul Blade behaves. Earlier on the channel, we actually figured out that Ether is basically just plasma, which is the really hot gas that makes up the sun. And canonically speaking, it's what makes up the blade of lightsabers. But here's the difference between Soul Blade and lightsabers. A lightsaber is just a beam of plasma, so while it can deflect lasers and go through shields, the blade is indestructible. Meanwhile, we saw Homura break her sword when she tried to attack the Black Rock, a monster with really tough scales. And earlier in the story, Homura actually swings at a sniper bullet like it's a baseball. Neither of these things would be possible if Soul Sword was a plasma beam, because plasma is less dense than solids. So even if Soul Blade is made of ether, we can only assume it behaves like a real sword. But before I explain what this means for us, make sure to hit that like button if you've been enjoying the video so far. Now, like I was saying, what this means for us is that when we're observing how Homura deflects bullets, we can assume that this is as close to real life that you're gonna get. In other words, she needs to deal with the real-world obstacle of bullets. Like we mentioned earlier, the main obstacle of dealing with bullets is their insane speed. It's why most people who like the way their face looks tend to just duck for cover. But not if you're trying to be a badass. So the obvious question is, how do you overcome that speed? The answer is so simple, it actually sounds stupid. Basically, just be faster than the bullet. And again, I know that sounds like something your dad would tell you, but that's really what it comes down to. I mean, let me put it this way, most people are faster than Nerf darts. Wait, is that trademarked? Well, most people are faster than foam darts, so it doesn't take much to swat them away. And the same principle applies in sports like baseball. The average baseball pitch in Major League Baseball is somewhere around 90 miles per hour. For everyone else in the world, that's almost 145 kilometers per hour. But remember, a projectile loses speed over time thanks to gravity and other forces. According to one physicist, the pitch loses about 10% of its speed by the time it reaches the plate. Meaning, by the time it reaches home plate, the ball would be traveling at roughly 81 miles per hour. Now, the sweet spot of the bat, the part of the bat that you actually want to hit the ball, travels about 94 miles per hour during the swing. In plain English, you manage to send the ball flying by swinging the bat faster than the ball is moving. So whenever you're trying to deflect a projectile, it's really as simple as just being faster than it. Now, I say this is simple, but obviously it's a lot harder in practice. For example, I might have been using MLB numbers, but not everyone can swing like my guy Big Papi. If they could, then they wouldn't really be calling him Big Papi, now would they? So we know the trick is to be faster than the bullet, but just how fast do you need to be? Also, to those of you wondering whether a sword can really cut a bullet, the quick answer is yes. There's a lot of numbers to show how it's possible, but just know it's been done before. But like I was saying, we need to figure out how fast Homura swings her sword. Right off the bat, pun intended, you might guess that she swings like a baseball player. But let's do the math. A 9mm round has a muzzle velocity that's usually just short of 1200 feet per second. When we convert that, we get about 818 miles per hour. Again, for everyone else, that's almost 1,317 kilometers per hour. Yeah, not exactly gonna cut it. Okay, that's it, I'm done, I'm sorry, that's the last one. But seriously, if you want to play home run derby with snipers like Homura, you're gonna need to be about 9 times faster than professional baseball players. But that's not the only problem, cause see, swinging the sword like Homura is just one of the skills you need. The other skill is reaction time. In baseball, you're not just swinging the bat and hoping you hit something. You're watching the pitch and swinging your bat at just the right moment. Swinging a sword without the proper reaction time is like button mashing before you actually learn a character, which is about as annoying as using a sword in a game with guns where the whole challenge is how good are you with guns. But that's a side tangent. Point is, you need quick moves and quick reflexes. So the question we have to answer is exactly how fast do you need to react? Well, like I said, a 9mm bullet has a bullet velocity of about 1200 feet per second, but that's really just a number until you put it into context. So for our purposes, let's say Homura is standing about 30 feet away from the gun, which is still point blank range for a 9mm round. At 30 feet, traveling 1200 feet per second, the bullet would reach Homura in 0.025 seconds. So when Homura is deflecting those bullets, she is literally acting within a fraction of a second. But is this really possible? The answer is, it depends. Obviously, the further the bullet is, the more time you have to react. So how does our distance of 30 feet compare to human reaction time? A quick Google search tells us that the average reaction time is somewhere between 150 and 300 milliseconds. For our purposes, let's pretend we're pro gamers and go with 150. Now, like I said, it takes the bullet 0.025 seconds to travel 30 feet. In other words, that's only 25 milliseconds. Meaning, someone could fire 6 rounds in the amount of time it would take you to react. And in case you think that's something you can overcome with a training arc, let me just give you some perspective. Sports Illustrated once recorded Muhammad Ali, one of the best heavyweight boxers of all time, throwing a jab in 0.04 of a second. That's still not even close to 25 milliseconds. So at that point-blank range, Homura is quite literally moving faster than Muhammad Ali. Great for Homura, but not so great for us. Now, there is a glimmer of hope in all of this. See, we've been talking at the point-blank range. At that range, you would need reflexes that go beyond superhuman. But like we said earlier, creating more distance means you have more time to react. Backing up to 180 feet would give you exactly enough time. And if you double that, which would be more than a whole football field, then you'd have about 300 milliseconds. That's the slow end of the average reaction. So in theory, you could be slicing bullets like Homura. You just need to put an entire football field between you and the bullet. But therein lies the problem. There are some situations where you're dealing with someone who has a handgun at a longer range, but for the most part, those common self-defense situations are going to be in that point-blank range. So in a common self-defense scenario, assuming the other person is using the common 9mm handgun, the odds of you reacting in time are practically impossible. It is possible in theory. You just need to be dozens of times faster than all of the best athletes in human history. And that's not even considering what would happen if you were up against even more dangerous guns like an AR-15 that uses even bigger bullets. So to answer our original question, yes, it is technically possible to deflect bullets with a sword, just not as fast as Homura. And while it might be possible at long ranges, it's clearly not applicable to everyday self-defense. If you're just slicing foam darts, then by all means go for it. If you're dealing with airsoft pellets and paintballs, maybe practice first. In most cases, unless you're planning on a pretty serious training program, I'd suggest finding some cover. Now, before I close out the video, I want to ask you guys about Homura. We figured out that she's got some pretty godlike reflexes, and there's been a lot of talk about how strong she is. So comment how you think she ranks against other characters. I'll pick my favorite and share it as the comment of the week in the community tab. And finally, if you'd like another video on the science in Eden Zero, then make sure to check out the video I mentioned earlier. In that video, I explain why ether is really just plasma, and why Shiki can't really use gravity powers. If you want the full explanation and all of the science behind it, then just click on the playlist linked right here. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.